Here are a couple things you need to know about poverty and inequality. First, there are two kinds, relative and absolute poverty, and it is still the most pressing issue facing the developing world today. Absolute poverty is a social determinant of almost every measure of well-being we have, like access to clean water or a decent life expectancy. And second, it is getting better. There are fewer subjected to a life of extreme poverty today than ever before. We've reversed the number of people living in extreme poverty from 90% 200 years ago to less than 10% today, dropping from 30% in the last 3 decades alone. And third, that almost 10% still represents almost 700 million people in the world, the vast majority of which are here, in Africa. It is for them that I am making this video, and for them that I will implore you to help us reduce that number and to speed up the already decent progress that we've been making. Because alleviating poverty means eradicating decades of unnecessary suffering and maybe answering for the inequality that we as a species have already let go on for far too long. Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Adam, and this is Making a Difference. Simply put, poverty is a lack of money. We all know poverty is more complicated than that. The World Bank, who in recent years have been fighting hard to end global poverty, define it like this. Poverty is hunger. Poverty is lack of shelter. Poverty is being sick and not being able to see a doctor. Poverty is not having access to school and not knowing how to read. Poverty is not having a job, is fear for the future, living one day at a time. That will be our baseline for defining poverty, although there's definitely more to the story than that. How does that kind of poverty still exist, and what are we doing to end it? Well, I will reiterate, it's going extinct. An important step they gave us is something called the extreme poverty line. It is now considered people who are living on $1.95 a day. This is the widely used definition and measurement of absolute poverty, and there is a smaller percentage of the human population living in it than ever before. Absolute or extreme poverty is mostly what we've been talking about so far, and ending it has been the first priority of the World Bank and United Nations development efforts, such as the Millennium and Sustainable Development Goals. In 1995, the UN said extreme poverty is a condition characterized by severe deprivation of basic human needs, including food, safe drinking water, sanitation facilities, health, shelter, education, and information. It depends not only on income, but also on access to services. However, this definition needs constant reconsideration because as we advance as a society, we invent newer and better technologies and produce more information and make industrial leaps all the time. Great, for those who can afford it. But for those still living in extreme poverty, these are just more things they can't access. Relative poverty is a poverty defined comparatively and dependent on individuals' social context. Basically, how economically insecure someone feels compared to their neighbors. Usually, relative poverty is measured as the percentage of the population with an income less than some fixed proportion of the median income. We tend to use this term to measure things like inequality, like the Gini coefficient or the Thiel index. Global inequality is still getting worse, and in many places, national inequality is worsening too. As I said, the world's poor represent about 8.3% of the global population. The Millennium Development Goals signed in 2000 aimed for 10% extreme poverty by 2015. They beat it. The new goal from 2015's replacement Sustainable Development Goals is no extreme poverty by 2030. None. Like I said, we flipped from 90% 200 years ago to less than 10% living in extreme poverty today. It's definitely getting better. But here are some other numbers. The top 1% of the world own the same amount of wealth as the bottom 57%. And there are still 635 million people living in extreme poverty today. And more than half of those people are living here in Africa. Let me introduce you to two women, Grace and Jane. They aren't real, but they are representative. They are each in the 40th percentiles of household incomes in their respective countries, which means they earn 10% less than the average a year. They both consider themselves poor, but are they? Jane is 32 and lives in Texas. She is a nurse and earns around $50,000 a year. Grace, on the other hand, is 29, lives in Lusaka, and she's a teacher. However, she only earns around $900 a year. They're living in incomparable situations of access and opportunity. There is a $49,000 disparity between the 40th percentiles of income in America and Zambia. How's that possible? That's the reality of global inequality, and why I would implore you first to consider the almost billion suffering near or under the extreme poverty line here in the global south, and not on relative poverty in the north. Unless you're living in a mixed middle-income country like me, where 1 in every 4 South Africans is still living in extreme poverty in 2018. Real income growth isn't as helpful a measure when such a high concentration of the poor are located in the developing world. Look, I'll admit, things are always getting better for all of us as a species, just not at the same rate. Extreme poverty is more concentrated than ever before. Africa, Asia, and South America are in the throes of a war against poverty that they didn't start. So, what do we do about it? An analogy from philosopher Peter Singer that anyone interested in global poverty will be familiar with begins with a man and his new shoes. They're very nice, and they cost around $100 or 1,000 rand. On his way home, wearing his new kicks, he sees a child in a pond. Her head is bobbing up and down in the water, and suddenly, she's under. It's not even a question. You've got to act fast. But if you take the time to get your new shoes off, she might drown. So, do you leave the shoes on? Of course you do. The shoes are replaceable and incomparable to the value of that girl's life. But here's the thing. Peter Singer explains this as a matter of costs and benefits. Is that child's life worth saving? Yes. And there are children dying all over the world, as innocent and as valuable as that child in the pond. 12. 12 is the number of children who die every minute from preventable causes related to extreme poverty. It could be malaria or having no food or drowning in a pond. It shouldn't matter. You see where he's going with this. What's the difference between a life we can save right in front of us and one somewhere else? A child dying from a freak drowning accident and one dying in other parts of the world are equally deserving of our compassion, and all children and all those living in extreme poverty are equally morally innocent and valuable. History shows us that the more cooperation, participation, and opportunity there is for everyone, the better off we all are. Poverty is not the only issue facing the world's poor, but it is fundamental to all issues of access, opportunity, and equality that we face. The kindness, compassion, and generosity that has led us here to this impressive decline in poverty is just the beginning. And with more considered and carefully researched choices of interventions and where to put our efforts, I think 0% by 2030 is a conservative estimate. We have the research, we have the resources, we have the will. We can do it, because for those still facing the harsh realities of domestic poverty and global inequality, the sooner the better. I'll see you soon. One of our favorite solutions to alleviating poverty is to do it directly. Direct cash transfers are an unconditional grant that provides a basic income for the poorest among us. Universal basic income will be coming up soon, but for now, you should visit Give Directly, which offers one of the most effective solutions to poverty. They identify villages and communities across East Africa whose people are living in the worst poverty imaginable and provide them with a basic income to help lift them out of poverty and encourage their community's development and empower its people. Their numbers and research are incredible. Have a look down below.